Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to PowerDrift and welcome to an extremely special video on PowerDrift, because today is not just about going out and shooting beautiful cars and motorcycles. Today we're talking to two incredible people from Red Bull Racing. Yes, my dreams have finally come true, and accompanying me on this dream talk is going to be Soumil Arora, which is fitting because he is literally the voice of motorsport in India. Now, before I hand it over to Soumil, let me quickly introduce our guests. Firstly, we're going to have Knowles, who is the acting head of sporting at Oracle Red Bull Racing and was previously part of the strategy department as well. And then we have Jack Harrington, who is the head of partnerships at Oracle Red Bull Racing. So two very senior, important people. Stephen, Jack, how are you guys doing?
Feeling great, thanks so much. A pleasure to be talking to you all, and thanks for the sort of grand introduction there. I guess sort of by way of intro, my name's Jack. As you mentioned, I look after all of our technical partners, ultimately using our partnerships to bring performance to our car and our business. So hopefully can let you know a few secrets about the team and what we do here, and then I'll pass over to Stephen, who's on my left here.
So hi everyone, thank you very much for having us. Great to speak to you at a competition like Formula Barra. I did myself do Formula Student in the UK, which I think is kind of a similar sort of event. So it's quite close to my heart and how I got my start in motorsport. So great to see you all there. And yeah, happy to answer any questions you have.
Stephen, Jack, it is a pleasure to interact with both of you today, especially given the occasion that we find ourselves in. Today we are a part of the world's coolest classroom that's brought to us by Red Bull India. And I say we because apart from the two of you, Karan and myself, we also have over 100 students sitting live at the Curry Motor Speedway who are competing in the Formula Bharat this weekend, the first step into becoming a Formula One engineer. And looking at all of the stuff they're doing this weekend, like homologating a race car, making sure that it's reliable, making sure that it handles well and passes all the compliance checks. It reminds me so much of the kind of stuff that you guys end up doing at the race team every single weekend, but right at the very grassroots level. But in Formula One, it must be crazy, right? Because working with a world champion team like Red Bull Racing, there must be so much pressure to get things right. So what is it like to compete in a high pressure environment like Formula One? And what's it like working at a champion team like Red Bull Racing?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, it is high pressure. And what comes with that is intense time pressure as well. And I think the thing that really comes to the fore as a real key thing is communication. It might sound kind of like a bland point to bring up, but it really is quite a differentiator because we have so many different technical experts and they're all responsible for different parts of the car, different parts of analysis, race strategy, the engine, everything like that. And it's fantastic having experts, but if you can't come together and communicate succinctly to the rest of the team who may be looking at other aspects of the car and the team's performance when it really matters, then all those expertise kind of go to waste. So there's a real premium on being able to communicate quickly, succinctly, and in a calm, clear fashion, really. So that's one thing I'd say is probably a differentiator between the really top experienced teams and maybe the teams who a little bit less experienced, I think, from my experience.
I actually have a follow-up question to this, and I want to ask, what is the most misunderstood thing about Oracle Red Bull Racing? To us outsiders, it just seems like you guys turn up to a race weekend with a plan to win, with a car to win, and you guys just go out and win it. But I'm pretty sure there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that we outsiders don't know about on a team as big and as successful as Red Bull Racing.
Yeah, I think it's probably the level of preparation and depth that we go into for every aspect of the upcoming race weekend. So the prep for example, the car setup that you'll hit the track with in P1, the prep for that will have started over a month prior to us actually getting there. So you do the initial work on it, and then you'll maybe feed in some learnings that you've had from the more recent events building up to that race. So you kind of you work on it and you develop your car setup over a month or so period prior to the event itself. And it's true across a lot of aspects as well. So the engine setup, the strategy, we'll be running our simulations, looking at a lot of different scenarios, again, a month ahead of time, really to get into just what are the headline questions we need to answer in the first practice session. So you're not there working it out straight from the off of like all these different possible scenarios. What do we need to think about? You've already kind of narrowed it down to what we need to really focus on to hone in on the best plan for the weekend. So it wouldn't really be possible to do that during the hour of P1 or during the hour of P2. So a lot of prep goes into understanding where you need to be.
And I think to add on to that, I mean, what you see in Formula One on the TV is just the tip of the iceberg. You know, we're only allowed to take 60 people who are involved with the running of the car to a race weekend. And what people don't realize is that that's not enough to run these cars. These are data-driven monsters. And so there's actually, whenever we're running a session live, back at the factory in Milton Keynes, we have a live data link, and we'll have a further, 40 to 60 people sat in our operations room over a race weekend looking at the data feed live coming from the car. You know, we're pulling over 11 terabytes of data from the car over a race weekend, and within that there's so many millions of data points that Stephen alluded to that we have to dig into. So what you see on TV is just a very small part of what we do as a business and as a team. There's ultimately close to 2,000 people working for Red Bull Racing, building 2 cars that go racing every other weekend. And when you think of it that way, it really gives you an idea as just to how far ahead of every other motorsport Formula One really is.
Jack, I find your role to be particularly exciting because as the head of partnerships at Red Bull Racing, you must get to spearhead so many interesting partnerships between Red Bull Racing and other companies who can then help you guys on the journey to making sure that the car gets as fast as possible. And I find it fascinating because I can see synergies right at the grassroots level at Formula Bharat too, because so many teams here have tied up with partners and that's made their life so much easier. But at a Formula One level, just how important is it to have good partners? And how does it impact your life as a racing team?
Yeah, I mean, you said it exactly there. I think just to give you a bit more clarity about what I do. So in Formula One, you have 2 types of partnerships. You have sort of commercial partnerships would be, the Tag Heuer watch brand. Ultimately, they're our official timekeeper. But we don't really use their watches to time the car. It's more of a branding play. We're very proud to wear their logo on our shirt as we travel around the world. Then we have our innovation partners. Now, innovation partners are ultimately partners that provide a product to us that allow our car to either go faster on track or our business to perform better back at our factory in Milton Keynes. And ultimately, it's kind of my job to work with our partner network to provide Stephen with tools that he can use to further the performance of the car. So it's not just us relying on our internal resource. It's also looking at our partner network and the experience that they can bring to the team. So whether that be Oracle using their cloud to process our strategy simulations over a race weekend, or DMG Mori and using their machine shop machines to, make the carbon fiber and drill the metals that we need to put the car ahead, to Hexagon enabling us to scan the car and make sure it fits within the regulatory boundaries. I mean, I could carry on going on and on and on about all these different partners and how they provide performance to the team. But yeah, it's not just us. It's not just our 2,000 people that we have based in our campus here. We also work with our partner network to develop products and bring them essentially to market, which is we're a market, and test them in really the hottest test bed that you can possibly understand, which is Formula One racing. So yeah, it's really fun, working with our partners. And you've got to imagine Formula One is a microcosm of wider industry. Yes, we're a fancy race team, and you see those cars racing around a track on a weekend. But we also have, HR, legal, facilities, finance, design, manufacturing, all of those different elements of our team you would find in pretty much any business around the world. So although it might seem quite unique to what we do here, ultimately the products that we're using in Formula One are then lift and drop into other industries as well. So it's a great showcase for our partners' products, as well as giving us performance as a team as well.
Okay, I know it's tough to pick just one, but Jack, if you had to elaborate on any one of these partnerships that you've just mentioned, which one would you like to tell us more about? And being the nerd I am, you can tell with my glasses, I'm just so curious to know the kind of problems you solve with your partners and how they help you on your journey into becoming a serial winner as Red Bull Racing.
Yeah, well, I'm very happy to say that I'm a bit of a nerdy geek myself when it comes to Formula One, so we're in good company here. I think the best, Stephen's here, right? So it's probably a good example to talk about strategy. So I mentioned before about how Oracle process our Monte Carlo simulations, for which we use to make strategy decisions on track, which I'll probably pass over to Stephen to talk about in a bit more detail. But ultimately, ahead of a race weekend, we're running close to 8 billion Monte Carlo simulations, ultimately tweaking each scenario of simulation that we're running to try and test a what if. So what if this happens, how do we react? And all of those simulations, which Stephen will talk about much more eloquently than me, are running on the Oracle Cloud. And that gives us advantages because we operate within a cost cap environment. So ultimately, we have to make sure that we're very keen on what we're spending our money on. And being able to do our simulations on the cloud means that we only run these simulations on a race weekend. We don't need all this processing power switched on all the time. So we can turn on the cloud, have access to huge amounts of processing data, up our simulations by 25% more than we were able to do before. And that ultimately brings us performance. I mean, we've been partnering with Oracle since 2020. And funnily enough, that's pretty much when we started winning races. So you can pretty much say, that every winning decision has been made on the Oracle cloud. I don't know if you want to add anything onto that, Stephen, about what we're doing there.
Yeah, sure. As you touched on, we run a huge number of simulations covering a vast range of scenarios. So that obviously goes into the pre-event preparation that I spoke about before, right through to the race itself live. I think the thing that makes the partnership itself so impactful is the fact that our demand isn't static. It's not a constant thing. So we're not actually that time pressured to do all of our pre-event work that I spoke about in the month ahead. But obviously, if you're talking about making an alteration to your race plan at the time, you need that compute power on demand. And we wouldn't have the infrastructure here to have that level of throughput when it comes to our computation simulations without a partner like Oracle. So we can on demand burst and expand our capacity massively, so we can then get those millions of simulations through in a very, very short space of time when, let's say, something's taken us by surprise in the race, some circumstance we hadn't foreseen, and we can then get our answer very, very quickly. And that's something we really wouldn't have been able to do without the help of a tech partner like Oracle.
When you're running the race simulations, how big of a factor is the driving style of a driver? Is that key in deciding race strategy as well?
It is definitely a factor, yes. I guess the primary factors really are the driver's pace, which I guess is a part of how they drive, if you like. Other things like the tyre performance are also the kind of primary inputs. But we do quite often take into account the different strengths and weaknesses we maybe see with the drivers, and maybe that shifts with time. It depends how the balance of the car is evolving through the season, but you might end up in quite a nice position where we've got a rich vein of form in terms of making the tyres last well, and maybe one driver's better at that than the other. So we will factor that in and maybe take one plan or the other based on who we think is best able to execute a certain plan.
You touched upon having the compute power ready to make those last minute decisions, but I really want to know, how tough is it to make those last minute decisions? Because is it just one person making them, and if he makes the wrong decision, you guys talk about him in the back room or something like that? Or is it a collective team decision that's happening there?
I think preparation is key with all of this. And that goes at a really high level, and then even as you build up to these decisions in a short time frame, you don't want to be making decisions in an absolute split second, because then you really are down to your split second instincts. And yes, those times do come around occasionally, but by and large, if I've made a decision with 10 seconds to go, I feel like I've probably not done a great job of bringing Christian along on the journey, speaking to the race engineer, getting the right feedback from the driver. So we have some kind of coded messages and things which we'll try and get some feedback from the drivers as well, because they can feel things that we'll never see in the data. That's just the reality of it. So we try and make sure we've kind of got as much information as we can before the decisions are made. And then even if it's a lap or two ahead, it's still 50-50. You know that you've had the conversations to discuss what might choose us to go a certain way. So you try and get everyone onto the same page as much as possible before pulling the trigger, and metaphorically speaking, on those decisions. So yeah, I think it all comes down to thinking ahead, really. And that's where the simulations and the speed really helps, because if you were sat there waiting for your answer, then you have 1, 2, 3 minutes less, or a couple of laps less, to have that conversation to make sure everybody's on board with the plan. And as I'm sure you can imagine, there's a lot riding on these decisions, and it's best not to surprise the entire team with something, because they might be put in a position where the crew are under a lot of pressure to do a pit stop that they weren't expecting, or something like that. So while we won't give anything away externally, we're prepping for these key decisions as much as possible.
And a big component of that success also has to be the driver. And you folks at Red Bull Racing probably have one of the best drivers to have ever competed in Formula One, Max Verstappen. Guys, just what is it like to work with Max Verstappen? What are the meetings with him like? Just how involved is he? And what sort of feedback does a world champion like Max end up giving in all those engineering and strategy meetings? I would just love to know more about him, as would all the students watching at Formula Bharat.
Yeah, I think Max is he's a very confident guy. He's got, as you say, unbelievable ability behind the wheel. So he definitely take notice of any feedback or input he has on a plan you might want to propose. I think, luckily, we've had enough success and we have a good enough engineering team that there's quite a lot of trust going both ways. So I think when we propose something that maybe initially his reaction is, that's going to be tough. If we say, look, we've gone away and looked at the data and also your own past performances, we think this should be possible. He does believe us and we go and execute that strategy. But we do actively seek his feedback a lot when it comes to, okay, we might think we'll be following a certain strategy, but that might mean you're in traffic for a number of laps in the second stint or something like that. How do you think that will impact the tyres? Again, as I say, a driver of Max's caliber can feel what that does to the tyres later on in the race. So, and he's also had the experience of the car on track during free practice in that race weekend up to that point. So you do definitely take that side of his feedback very much into account when making those planning decisions.
Now, we've spoken a lot about planning and pre-planning, but what happens when stuff goes wrong during the race, like a reliability issue, for example? What really happens then?
Yeah, I guess reliability issues are a great one because, well, they're not great when they happen, but that's a situation when you quite often don't know exactly what's wrong with the car yet. And as Jack said, we've got literally terabytes of data coming through. And maybe the driver can feel an issue evolving and we need to very, very quickly diagnose what the problem is. So it's a combination of the data and also the communication being quick and to the point and succinct. So we do have quite well rehearsed and structured strategies for how we deal with diagnosing a potential engine failure, for example. And it might be that you can't actually finish that race, but we only have a limited number of engines available to us across the season, so they're very precious to us. And if you were to destroy one on track, that's actually pretty disastrous for the championship potentially. So we have pretty rigorous procedures in terms of communication. B, we have a lot of automated calculations that then sit on top of the raw data to try and diagnose potential areas that we believe could fail. And then we'll have basically an alarm system. So we might say there's maybe like an MGUK shaft fatigue limit or something. It could be many things really, but we've developed ways of diagnosing all of those issues to then quickly decide whether or not we do or not need to stop the car on track to prevent causing more damage that could then hurt our season further down the line.
Now, the next and the most important thing that we need to speak to you folks about is opportunities of getting into Formula One. Stephen, you come from a more technical side of things. Jack, your background is largely around the commercial side of Formula One, and it clearly tells us that there's more than one way of getting into Formula One, which fills me with so much hope. For all of the students watching here today at Formula Bharat, what advice would you give them on their journey to Formula One? How does an Indian student today go from Formula Bharat to Formula One? What do they study? What qualities and characteristics should they have? And what exactly should they do to prove to a Formula One team that they are worthy of being hired and they are worthy of working at the pinnacle of motorsport?
The big question that I will do my very best to answer. But to your point, I think my background's very strange. So I was an IT manager, and ultimately I found myself heading up technical partnerships at a Formula One team. But I think it's a great representation of what people potentially don't understand about Formula One and the business that goes on behind it. To my previous point, there are so many different departments that you'd find in any other business that we have here in our team here. So you might look at the team and think, oh, it's just the mechanics, the engineers on the pit wall, the drivers, that those are the real only jobs that are going in a Formula One team. But actually, it's pretty much anything that you can think of that you'd find in another business. So my role in particular is, looking after partnerships, and the way I got my role was working in an IT company for a long time and building up experience of how that IT company would sell to other IT companies or sell to other businesses, and also understanding the sort of base level of technology that might go into designing a car. And that experience is what got me my job. So it just, you might think, oh, what I'm studying or the experience I have is not relevant for a role in Formula One. I pretty much guarantee it is. So don't ever think that just because you're doing one thing that there isn't a route into a Formula One team. There definitely is. Just perhaps look away from the obvious. The other thing that I would say is that at Red Bull, we are world champions. We, take the very best, but we also like to give people wings. So if you keep an eye out on our LinkedIn page, there's a lot of internships and things that get going here at the team. I very much encourage you to apply for them. But when applying for them, think about what we might be looking for. We want to see that you're really, driven to get into Formula One. So what have you done in your background to show that to us? I mean, working on what you're working on at the moment is a great example of it, but have you volunteered at your local racetrack? Have you shown an interest or gone along to a lot of races and walked up and down the pit lane and shown some interest in another formula? Like, are you really showing that heart and soul for this role that you're applying for? So I'd say don't think that any role isn't applicable to F1. It probably is. Secondly, really show that you really want a role in Formula One and demonstrate that to us. And then final thing is just network. Anybody that you can meet who might be connected in any way to the world of motorsport, it's worth making a connection with them too, because you never know how that introduction or conversation, what that will lead to. So that's probably what I'd suggest if you're looking at it. That's my background. I guess I'll pass over to Stephen, who's probably got a bit more of an engineering route into where he is now.
I mean, I think Jack answered that very well. There's a lot of parallels really on the engineering side. I think I would just reiterate that Jack said there's 2,000 or so people building two cars, and guarantee you every single one of them is very competitive and very motivated by motorsport. So anything you can do to demonstrate that, and as Jack said, Formula Barrett's a great start with that. But anything else that shows that you've got a passion for motorsport, you're competitive, and it's long hours with these jobs, particularly on the engineering side, sometimes at the track, for example, or in aerodynamics. So you do have to be very, very motivated, which I'm sure all of you are. But anything that you can do to really show that drive and passion for motorsport is going to set you in good stead, because we take the best, but there's plenty of people who are very strong academically, but we're looking for something a bit more than that as well. We're looking for that drive too.
I'm sure in the last few years, there must have been a whole stream of new jobs to apply for, especially with AI coming into the fold.
Definitely true, yeah. I think I've been quite lucky in strategy where, yes, it's in engineering, but I've worked with physicists, data scientists, mathematicians, a whole range of skill sets and backgrounds. But I think as data and AI becomes more and more at the forefront of what we do as a sport, I think there will be a broadening of technical expertise. So I think, classically going back 10 years or so, you'd have predominantly mechanical aerospace engineers. And yes, we still employ a lot of those people, but I think there's going to be more and more openings for people who are more in the data and AI space for sure.
And I think also on that, another route in is that, a lot of the time actually working for one of our partners is a good route into the sport on the innovation side. In particular in areas like CFD, if we're using the software on a day-to-day basis, a lot of the people who we bring in from our partner network work alongside our engineers here to show how to effectively use the tools that they're providing to us, and that can often end up with a transition to working for the team itself. So yeah, again, it's not the most obvious routes that sometimes get you into the team, but to your point, with this ever-broadening reliance on technology and new forms of technology such as Gen AI, etc., there's definitely a lot more scope for even further diverse backgrounds to make it into the team here.
Lastly, guys, I want to speak to you folks about 2025. Particularly you, Stephen, because you've taken on a new role. And firstly, many congratulations on becoming the active head of sporting at Red Bull Racing. Now, in this role, you have to be a part of so many briefs and debriefs with the FIA, because you're working very closely with them on making sure that all the regulations are properly met from the sporting point of view. So firstly, what are those meetings like? And what's the most exciting part about being a part of this role for 2025 and beyond?
Yeah, okay. So I think we have briefings and debriefs after all the sessions through the race weekend, and we we effectively cover all topics in all of the briefings. So the technical or the engineering team will talk about the car setup. The strategy team will talk about strategy points. I'll be talking about, we're talking early in the event, I'll be talking about maybe incidents that have happened at that track previously and issues you might need to be looking out for. I think basically the focus shifts as the weekend goes on. So let's say the strategy is pretty high level, pretty simple to begin with, because you don't really know so much. You just know what questions you need to answer. So that's quite a short part of the discussion. But then the car setup to begin with, there might be 10 different potential avenues we might want to take with the car setup. So that will then be covered in a lot of detail early on. And then as you move through the weekend and as the car goes to what we call park firmware, where you can't change it anymore, then the discussions about what to do with the car itself maybe take a bit of a back burner. And then it's more onto the operational side, the strategy and sporting. So strategy side, like more detailed in terms of specifics of tyre compounds, or what kind of stint lengths we think are achievable, like the real nitty gritty of how to execute the race. And the same with the sporting side, really. So the various scenarios, particularly wet races, where we discussed nuances of areas of regulation that were perhaps a little bit in the grey that we could maybe exploit. It follows a pretty similar format throughout, again, just to try and keep that communication clear. But the focus shifts from maybe engineering the car at the beginning of the weekend through to then executing the race on Sunday.
I think on my side, there's not as much pressure on me as there is on Stephen over a race weekend, because ultimately I'm not touching the car over a race weekend or making any decisions on track. My role over a race weekend is basically to do as good a job I can pretending to be an engineer like Stephen, to kind of explain Formula One to the masses. My job is essentially being the secret salesperson for our partners at a race weekend, telling their guests at track around how their product brings performance to the team. So that's the base of it. How that'll look is that generally over a race weekend in the morning, I'll go to a partner event and I'll give a presentation about what to expect over the race weekend and how their technology is going to benefit us and what they're going to see that day. But also it can be, I have a very strange, weird, evolving role at the race weekend, which means that I often mentoring celebrities around, for example. So the other week I was showing Ed Sheeran about how a steering wheel works, and so it's very bizarre. It can be, it's weird how numb you become to it all. You sort of halfway through a conversation with, I don't know, Ed Sheeran, as I say, you sort of snap out and think, oh my God, what am I doing here? It's ultimately a really exciting, dynamic place to work, and it's a real pleasure to watch, Stephen and the team go about doing their business. I'm very fortunate that I get very close to the action and see them all at work, and it's hugely impressive what our team does to deliver the results that we do. And I only wish that everybody could get the access that I do over race weekend, so we could really see what goes on behind the scenes. But it's a brilliant job, and one that I love very much.
And I think that's pretty much the end of our interaction. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Jack. It was an absolute pleasure. Lots of very interesting insights that we got to hear from you guys. So thanks a ton for that and for your time as well. And thank you, Soumil. Any more words to add before we sign off?
Yeah, man, this was so much fun. And we've just got so many stories to uncover in the world of motorsport. Not just in the world of cars, but also in the world of bikes and adventure stuff as well. There's so much to look out for, and if there's any particular guest who you want to hear from, let us know down in the comments below. We'll make sure that we can get them on PowerDrift and uncover these amazing stories in the world of motorsport. But now, thank you for watching, guys. It's been a pleasure to have you here, and hopefully this video benefits you in some way, because we really want more Indians in Formula One, and this was our way to bring you closer.
Thank you very much, guys. Thanks for having
Thank you, guys.